The arrival of the letter. The day started like any other. John Carter woke up to the sound of his alarm clock blaring at 6 a.m. sharp. He groaned, slapping the snooze button with a practiced hand, and rolled over in bed. The faint light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing himself for another monotonous day at the office. John was a man of routine. Every morning, he followed the same ritual: shower, coffee, toast, and then the short commute to his job as a mid-level manager at a logistics company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. At 35, he had settled into a comfortable, if unremarkable, life. He had a small apartment, a reliable car, and a cat named Whiskers who tolerated his presence. He wasn't unhappy, but he often wondered if this was all there was to life. That morning, as he sipped his coffee and scrolled through the news on his phone, something unusual happened. The doorbell rang. John frowned. It was too early for visitors, and he wasn't expecting any packages. He set his coffee down and made his way to the front door. When he opened it, there was no one there, just an empty hallway. But on the doormat lay a single envelope. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but his name was written on the front in neat, familiar handwriting. Too familiar. It looked like his own. John's heart skipped a beat. He tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs, but as he read it, his hands began to tremble. "Dear John, if you're reading this, then it worked. I don't have much time to explain, but you need to listen carefully. This letter is from the future, 20 years in the future, to be exact. I'm you, John. Or rather, you are me. I'm writing this to warn you about something terrible that's going to happen. Something that will change everything. On November 15th, 2043, a catastrophic event will occur. I can't go into detail here, but it will result in the deaths of thousands of people, including someone you love. You have to stop it. You have to change the future. But be careful. Changing the future comes with consequences. Things you can't possibly imagine. I've already seen what happens if you fail, and it's worse than you can imagine. You have to succeed no matter the cost. I'm sorry to put this burden on you, but there's no one else who can do it. You're the only one who can stop this. Good luck. Sincerely, John Carter, you." John stared at the letter, his mind racing. It had to be a prank, right? Some kind of elaborate joke. But the handwriting, it was undeniably his. He knew his own handwriting better than anyone. And the date? November 15th, 2043. That was exactly 20 years from now. He read the letter again, his heart pounding in his chest. A catastrophic event? Thousands of deaths? Someone he loved? It was too much to process. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. What the hell is going on? He muttered to himself. He glanced at the clock. It was 6:45 a.m. He was going to be late for work if he didn't leave soon. But how could he focus on work after this? He needed answers. John grabbed his phone and did a quick search for time travel letters and messages from the future. The results were a mix of conspiracy theories, science fiction, and a few dubious scientific articles. Nothing concrete. Nothing that could explain what he was holding in his hands. He sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as a hoax, but another part, a deeper, more instinctive part, knew it was real. He could feel it in his gut. "Okay," he said aloud, trying to steady his nerves. "Let's say this is real. What do I do now?" The letter didn't give him much to go on. It mentioned a catastrophic event, but it didn't say what it was or how to stop it. All it said was that he had to change the future and that there would be consequences. John's mind raced. He needed more information. He needed to figure out what this event was and how to prevent it. But where to start? He glanced at the clock again. 7 a.m. He was definitely going to be late for work now, but he couldn't bring himself to care. This was bigger than his job, bigger than anything he'd ever faced before. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't just sit there. He had to do something. As he stepped out into the cool morning air, he felt a strange sense of determination. Whatever was coming, he would face it. He had to. The future, his future, depended on it. The investigation begins. John drove aimlessly for a while, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The letter from the future, or whatever it was, had shaken him to his core. He couldn't just go to work and pretend everything was normal. Not after this. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. After about 20 minutes of driving in circles, he pulled into the parking lot of a small diner he sometimes visited for breakfast. It was a quiet place, usually empty at this time of day, and he thought it might be a good spot to clear his head and figure out his next steps. He ordered a coffee and sat in a corner booth, spreading the letter out on the table in front of him. He read it again, searching for any clues he might have missed. The date, November 15th, 2043, was clear enough, but the rest was frustratingly vague. What kind of catastrophic event was it talking about? A natural disaster? A terrorist attack? A war? And who was the someone he loved who would die? He didn't have many close relationships in his life. His parents were gone, he had no siblings, and he wasn't currently dating anyone. The only person he could think of was his best friend, Mike, but Mike was like a brother to him. The thought of losing him was unbearable. John pulled out his phone and opened a note-taking app. He started jotting down everything he knew. 1. The letter is from the future, 20 years from now. 2. It's written in my handwriting. 3. A catastrophic event will occur on November 15th, 2043. 4. Thousands will die, including someone I love. 5. Changing the future has consequences. He stared at the list, trying to make sense of it. The first step, he decided, was to figure out what the event could be. If he could identify it, maybe he could find a way to prevent it. But how? He wasn't a scientist or a historian. He didn't have access to classified information or advanced technology. He was just an ordinary guy with an ordinary life. How was he supposed to stop something that hadn't even happened yet? He took a sip of his coffee, his mind racing. Maybe he needed to think outside the box. If the letter was really from the future, then it was possible that the event hadn't even been set in motion yet. Maybe it was something that could be prevented now, before it ever had a chance to happen. But what? He needed more information. He needed to know what the event was. John's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen and saw a text from Mike. "Hey, you coming in today? Boss is asking where you are." John hesitated. He couldn't tell Mike about the letter. Not yet. Anyway, Mike would think he'd lost his mind. But he needed someone to talk to, someone who could help him make sense of this. He typed a quick reply. "Not feeling great. Think I'm coming down with something. Tell the boss I'll be in tomorrow." Mike's response came a few seconds later. "You good? Need anything?" John smiled faintly. Mike was always looking out for him. "I'm fine. Just need to rest. Catch you later." He put his phone down and turned his attention back to the letter. He needed a plan. He needed to start somewhere. An idea struck him. What if he could find out more about the future? If the letter was real, then maybe there were other ways to get information about what was coming. He thought about the concept of time travel, about the idea of sending messages back in time. Was it possible? Could he find someone who knew more about this? He pulled out his phone again and did a quick search for time travel research and messages from the future. Most of the results were the same as before, conspiracy theories and science fiction, but one article caught his eye. It was from a reputable science magazine, and it discussed the theoretical possibility of sending information back in time using quantum mechanics. The article was dense and full of technical jargon, but the gist of it was that some scientists believed it might be possible to send messages through time under certain conditions. John's heart raced. Could this be how the letter was sent? If so, maybe there were others who had received similar messages. Maybe there was a way to contact them, to pool their knowledge and figure out what was going on. He bookmarked the article and continued searching. He found a few online forums where people discussed time travel and related topics. Most of the posts were wild speculation, but a few users seemed to take the subject seriously. He created an account and posted a message. "Has anyone ever received a letter or message from the future? I need to talk to someone who has experienced this. Please message me if you have. He wasn't sure if he'd get any responses, but it was worth a shot. In the meantime, he needed to keep digging. John spent the next few hours researching everything he could find about future predictions, catastrophic events, and time travel. He read about climate change, pandemics, nuclear war, and other potential global threats. He made notes, trying to see if any of them matched the vague description in the letter. By the time he left the diner, his head was spinning with information. He still didn't have any concrete answers, but he felt like he was making progress. He had a starting point, at least. As he drove home, he thought about the consequences the letter had mentioned. What did it mean that changing the future would have consequences? Would he be risking his own life? The lives of others? The letter had warned him to be careful, but it hadn't given him any specifics. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the letter on the passenger seat. He felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but he knew he couldn't ignore this. He had to see it through. When he got inside, he checked his phone and saw that he had a few responses to his forum post. Most of them were jokes or sarcastic comments, but one message stood out. I received something similar, a letter from the future. We need to talk. Call me. There was a phone number attached. John's heart pounded as he stared at the message. This could be it. This could be the break he needed. He took a deep breath and dialed the number. The stranger on the phone. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. A man's voice, deep and cautious, answered. Hello. John hesitated for a moment, suddenly unsure of what to say. Hi, my name's John. I saw your message on the forum. You said you received a letter from the future. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the man spoke again, his tone guarded. Yeah, I did. Did you get one too? Yes, John replied, his voice trembling slightly. It's written in my handwriting. It's dated 20 years from now. It warns me about a catastrophic event and tells me I have to stop it. The man exhaled sharply. Same here. Mine's dated 2044, though. Different year, but the same kind of warning. It's a lot to process. John felt a mix of relief and unease. Relief that he wasn't alone in this, but unease because it meant the letter might be real. If others were receiving them too, then this wasn't just some elaborate prank targeting him. This was something bigger. What does your letter say? John asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Does it give any details about the event? Not much, the man replied. It's vague, just like yours. But it mentions something about a global collapse and tells me I have to prevent it. It also says there will be consequences if I try to change things. What about yours? Mine mentions a catastrophic event on November 15th, 2043, John said. Thousands of deaths, including someone I love. But it doesn't say what the event is or how to stop it. Just that I have to. The man was silent for a moment. This is insane, he finally said. I mean, I've been trying to convince myself it's a hoax, but the handwriting is mine. I can't explain that. I know, John said. I feel the same way, but if this is real, if these letters are really from the future, then we can't just ignore them. We have to do something. Yeah, the man agreed. But what? I've been trying to figure that out for days. I don't even know where to start. John thought for a moment. Maybe we should meet, talk face to face. If we're both dealing with the same thing, maybe we can figure it out together. There was another pause. All right, the man said finally. But we need to be careful. If this is real, then we're messing with something big. We don't know who else might be involved or what's at stake. Agreed, John said. Where are you located? I'm in Chicago, the man replied. You? New York, John said. But I can travel. Maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle. Somewhere neutral. How about Cleveland? The man suggested. It's about halfway between us. We can meet there in a couple of days. Cleveland works, John said. I'll book a flight. How do I contact you? I'll text you the details, the man said. My name's David, by the way. "John," John replied. "I'll see you in Cleveland." They hung up, and John sat back, his mind racing. He felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. He wasn't alone in this anymore, but that also meant the stakes were higher. If David's letter was similar to his, then this wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. 2 days later, John found himself in a small coffee shop in downtown Cleveland. He'd booked a flight and a hotel room, telling Mike he was taking a few days off for a personal emergency. Mike had been concerned but didn't press for details. John sat at a corner table, nervously sipping a latte. He kept glancing at the door, wondering what David would look like. He hadn't asked for a description, and he realized now that was a mistake. How would he know who to look for? As if on cue, the door opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a slightly unkempt beard. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on John. He walked over, extending a hand. "John?" he asked. "Yeah," John said, standing up to shake his hand. "You must be David." "That's me," David said, sitting down across from him. He looked around the coffee shop, his expression tense. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up." "I had to," John said. "This is too big to ignore." David nodded. "Yeah, I've been going crazy trying to figure this out. I even showed the letter to a friend of mine who's a handwriting expert. He confirmed it's mine. No doubt about it." John felt a chill run down his spine. "So it's real," he said quietly. "This is really happening." "Seems like it," David said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to John. "Here, read it for yourself." John unfolded the paper and read the letter. It was eerily similar to his own, written in David's handwriting and dated 20 years in the future. It warned of a global collapse and urged David to prevent it, though it didn't specify how. It also mentioned consequences for changing the future. "This is insane," John said, handing the letter back. "But if we're both getting these letters, then there must be others. Maybe a lot of others." "That's what I'm thinking," David said. "But how do we find them? And more importantly, how do we figure out what we're supposed to do?" John leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We need to start piecing together what we know. Your letter mentions a global collapse. Mine mentions a catastrophic event in 2043. Maybe they're connected. Maybe the collapse is the result of the event." "Could be," David said. "But what kind of event are we talking about? A war? A natural disaster? A pandemic?" "I don't know," John admitted. "But we need to find out. And we need to figure out who's sending these letters. If they're from the future, then someone or something is trying to warn us. But why? And how?" David frowned. "You think it's some kind of government experiment? Or maybe a rogue scientist?" "Maybe," John said. "Or maybe it's something we can't even imagine. Either way, we need to be careful. If we're messing with the future, then we're playing with fire." David nodded. "Agreed. So what's the plan?" John thought for a moment. "First, we need to find others who've received these letters. If there are more people out there like us, then we need to connect with them. Second, we need to figure out what the event is and how to stop it. And third, we need to figure out who's behind this." "Sounds like a tall order," David said. "But I'm in. I can't just sit back and do nothing." "Neither can I," John said. "Let's start by reaching out on the forums again. See if we can find more people. And maybe we can do some research on potential future threats. See if anything matches the descriptions in our letters." David nodded. "All right, let's do it." They spent the next few hours brainstorming and making plans. By the time they left the coffee shop, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally, and together they were going to figure this out. But as they stepped out into the cool evening air, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around, but the street was empty. Still, the unease lingered. Whatever they were getting into, it was bigger than they realized. And the consequences of their actions, whatever they might be, were looming over them like a storm cloud. The network of strangers. John and David spent the next few days working together, scouring the internet for others who might have received letters from the future. They posted on forums, reached out to conspiracy theorists, and even contacted a few scientists who had written about time travel. Slowly but surely, they began to uncover a pattern. By the end of the week, they had identified 5 other people who claimed to have received similar letters. Each letter was written in the recipient's own handwriting, dated 20 years in the future, and warned of a catastrophic event. The details varied. Some mentioned global collapse, others referenced specific disasters like a massive earthquake or a nuclear meltdown, but the underlying message was the same: stop this from happening. The group decided to meet virtually, using an encrypted video chat to protect their privacy. John and David sat in John's apartment, their laptops open, as the faces of the others appeared on the screen. There was a woman in her 40s named Elena, a college student named Marcus, a retired engineer named Harold, and a journalist named Priya. Each of them looked as anxious and determined as John felt. "Thanks for joining," John said, breaking the ice. "I know this is all pretty overwhelming, but I think we're onto something. If we work together, we might be able to figure out what's going on." Elena, a no-nonsense woman with sharp features, spoke first. "I'll be honest, I'm still not sure I believe this is real, but the handwriting, it's mine. I can't explain that, so I'm here." "Same," Marcus said, running a hand through his messy hair. "I thought it was a prank at first, but the more I think about it, the more it freaks me out. If this is real, we can't just ignore it." Harold, the retired engineer, nodded thoughtfully. "I've been trying to approach this logically. If these letters are from the future, then someone or something has found a way to send information back in time. The question is how and why?" Priya, the journalist, leaned forward. "And who? Who's sending these? Is it us? Future versions of ourselves? Or someone else entirely?" John exchanged a glance with David. "We've been wondering the same thing," he said. "But for now, I think we need to focus on the common thread in all our letters: the catastrophic event. If we can figure out what it is, maybe we can stop it." "Agreed," Elena said. "But how do we do that? None of the letters give specifics." "We start by pooling our knowledge," David suggested. "Let's go around and share what our letters say. Maybe there's a pattern we're missing." One by one, the group shared the contents of their letters. Elena's mentioned a global economic collapse, triggered by a series of coordinated cyberattacks. Marcus's warned of a devastating pandemic that would wipe out millions. Harold's letter referenced a nuclear accident at a power plant, while Priya spoke of a climate catastrophe that would render parts of the planet uninhabitable. When it was John's turn, he read his letter aloud, emphasizing the date, November 15th, 2043, and the mention of someone he loved dying. As he finished, the room fell silent. "So we're looking at a range of possibilities," Priya said finally. "Cyberattacks, pandemics, nuclear disasters, climate change. It's like a checklist of every major threat humanity faces." "Exactly," Harold said. "But here's the thing. All of these events are interconnected. A cyberattack could trigger an economic collapse, which could lead to political instability, which could increase the risk of nuclear war. A pandemic could strain healthcare systems, leading to societal breakdown. Climate change could exacerbate all of these issues. It's a domino effect." John felt a chill run down his spine. "So you're saying the catastrophic event in our letters might not be just one thing. It could be a combination of factors." "Exactly," Harold said. "And if that's the case, then stopping it won't be easy. We'd need to address multiple threats simultaneously." "But how?" Marcus asked. "We're just ordinary people. We don't have the resources or the power to change things on that scale." "Maybe not individually," Priya said, "but together we might be able to make a difference. If we can figure out what's coming, we can warn people. We can try to prevent it." John nodded. "That's what I've been thinking, but we need more information. We need to figure out who's sending these letters and why. If we can understand their motives, maybe we can figure out how to stop this." "Agreed," Elena said. "But how do we do that? We don't even know where to start." "I've been thinking about that," David said. What if the letters aren't just warnings? What if they're also instructions? Maybe they're telling us what we need to do, but we're not seeing it. John frowned. What do you mean? Think about it, David said. My letter mentions a global collapse, but it also says I have to unite the fragments. What does that mean? Maybe it's a clue. Mine says something similar, Priya added. It talks about exposing the truth. Maybe that's a clue too. John's mind raced. So you're saying the letters might be giving us hints about what we need to do? Exactly, David said. We just need to figure out how to interpret them. The group spent the next hour dissecting their letters, looking for hidden meanings or patterns. They noted phrases like, unite the fragments, expose the truth, rebuild the foundation, and find the source. It was cryptic, but it felt like a starting point. All right, John said finally. Here's what we'll do. Each of us will focus on interpreting the clues in our letters. We'll research, investigate, and see if we can find any connections. We'll regroup in a week and share what we've learned. The others agreed, and the call ended with a sense of cautious optimism. John leaned back in his chair, feeling both exhausted and energized. They had a plan, but it was a long shot. Still, it was better than doing nothing. As he closed his laptop, David turned to him. You think we can really do this? I don't know, John admitted, but we have to try. If these letters are real, then the future depends on it. David nodded. Yeah, let's just hope we're not in over our heads. John didn't reply. He was already thinking about the next steps, about the clues in his letter and what they might mean. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something big, the hidden danger. Over the next week, John threw himself into researching the clues in his letter. The phrase "find the source" echoed in his mind, but he had no idea what it meant. Was it referring to the source of the catastrophic event? Or the source of the letters themselves? He spent hours online, reading about potential future threats and theories about time travel, but nothing seemed to fit. Meanwhile, the group stayed in touch through a private chat room, sharing updates and theories. Elena had discovered a connection between the phrase, unite the fragments, and a little-known research project on quantum entanglement. Marcus was investigating a biotech company that had been accused of unethical experiments, linking it to the pandemic mentioned in his letter. Harold was analyzing historical data on nuclear accidents, while Priya was digging into corporate cover-ups related to climate change. John felt a growing sense of camaraderie with the group, but he also couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. Something about the letters and the way they had all come together felt too convenient, like they were being led somewhere, but he didn't know where. His suspicions deepened when he received a strange email. It was from an anonymous sender, with no subject line and just one sentence in the body. You're closer than you think. Be careful who you trust. John stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Was this a warning? A threat? He forwarded the email to David and asked if he'd received anything similar. David replied almost immediately, No, but that's creepy. Maybe someone's watching us. John didn't know what to think. He considered bringing it up with the group, but decided to wait until their next meeting. He didn't want to cause unnecessary panic. When the group reconvened via video chat a week later, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone had made progress, but the pieces of the puzzle still didn't quite fit together. All right, John said, kicking off the meeting. Let's hear what everyone's found. Elena went first. I think unite the fragments refers to quantum technology. There's a research project called Project Fragment that's been working on quantum communication. If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can use it to send a message back to the future, or even prevent the collapse. Marcus nodded. That makes sense. My letter mentions a pandemic, and I've been looking into a biotech company called Virogen. They've been experimenting with engineered viruses, and there are rumors they're planning something big. If we can expose them, maybe we can stop the outbreak. Harold cleared his throat. I've been analyzing nuclear power plants, and there's one in particular that's a major risk. The Cedar Ridge plant has a history of safety violations, and it's located near a fault line. If there's an earthquake, it could cause a meltdown. We need to shut it down. Priya leaned forward. And I've been investigating a corporation called EcoGlobal. They've been suppressing evidence of climate change for years, and they're behind a lot of the policies that are accelerating the crisis. If we can take them down, we might be able to slow things down. John listened intently, impressed by the group's findings. But he couldn't ignore the email he'd received. "This is all great," he said. "But I think we need to be careful. I got an anonymous email warning me to be careful who I trust. Does that mean someone in this group isn't who they say they are?" The room fell silent. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. "That's concerning," Elena said finally. "But how do we know who to trust?" "We don't," John admitted. "But we need to be vigilant. If someone's trying to sabotage us, we can't let them." David spoke up. "I think we should focus on the clues in our letters. If we can figure out what they're telling us to do, maybe we can stay one step ahead." The group agreed, and they spent the next hour discussing their next steps. They decided to split into pairs to investigate their leads further. Elena and Harold would look into Project Fragment and the Cedar Ridge plant, while Marcus and Priya would focus on Virogen and EcoGlobal. John and David would continue trying to decipher the phrase, "Find the source." As the meeting ended, John felt a mix of hope and apprehension. They were making progress, but the stakes were higher than ever, and the anonymous email still weighed heavily on his mind. Over the next few days, John and David worked tirelessly to uncover the meaning of "find the source." They researched everything from energy sources to information networks, but nothing seemed to fit. Then, late one night, John had a breakthrough. "What if the source isn't a thing?" he said, pacing his apartment. "What if it's a person? Someone who's behind all of this? The letters, the threats, everything." David frowned. "You mean like a mastermind?" "Exactly," John said. "Think about it. The letters are too coordinated to be random. Someone or something is orchestrating this. If we can find them, maybe we can stop them." David nodded slowly. "All right, but how do we find this person?" John hesitated. "I think it's someone in the group." David's eyes widened. "What? Who?" "I don't know," John admitted. "But think about it. We all received letters, but we don't really know each other. What if one of them is lying? What if they're the source?" David looked skeptical. "That's a big accusation. Do you have any proof?" "Not yet," John said, "but I'm going to find it." The next day, John began quietly investigating the other members of the group. He started with Elena, digging into her background. She seemed legitimate, a successful businesswoman with no red flags. Next was Harold, the retired engineer. His story checked out too. Marcus and Priya were harder to pin down, but nothing stood out as suspicious. Frustrated, John decided to confront the group. During their next video call, he brought up his theory. "I think one of us might be the source," he said bluntly. "Someone who's manipulating this whole thing." The room erupted in protests. "That's ridiculous," Elena snapped. "We're all in this together." "Are we?" John shot back. "How do we know for sure?" Before the argument could escalate, Priya interrupted. "Wait, I think John might be onto something." Everyone turned to her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Priya took a deep breath. "I've been digging into EcoGlobal, and I found something strange. They've been funding research into time travel. And get this, one of their top scientists is named Dr. Elena Carter." John's blood ran cold. "Elena? That's your name." Elena's face went pale. "That's not me. I swear." "Then who is it?" John demanded. Before Elena could respond, the screen flickered and a new face appeared. A woman who looked eerily similar to Elena, but older. Her expression was cold and calculating. "Hello, John," she said. "I've been waiting for this." John stared at the screen, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" The woman smiled. "I'm Dr. Elena Carter, and I'm the one who sent the letters." The truth unveiled. The room fell into stunned silence as Dr. Elena Carter's face filled the screen. Her expression was calm, almost amused, as if she had been anticipating this moment for a long time. John felt a chill run down his spine. This was the source, the person behind the letters. But why? What was her endgame? "You've been busy," Dr. Carter said, her voice smooth and measured. "I must admit, I'm impressed. You've pieced together more than I expected." John's mind raced. He glanced at the other faces on the screen. Elena, Marcus, Harold, Priya, and David, all of them staring in shock. The Elena he knew, the one in their group, looked horrified. "This isn't me," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know who this woman is, but she's not me." Dr. Carter chuckled. "Oh, but I am you, my dear. Or rather, I'm the version of you from the future. The version who realized too late that humanity was doomed unless someone took drastic action." John's stomach dropped. "You're from the future?" "Yes," Dr. Carter said. "And so are all of you. Or at least future versions of you. The letters you received were written by your future selves, sent back in time to warn you about the catastrophe that's coming." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane. If you're from the future, why didn't you just tell us what's going to happen? Why all the cryptic clues?" "Because time is fragile," Dr. Carter replied. "If I had given you too much information, it could have altered the timeline in unpredictable ways. The letters were designed to guide you without revealing too much. But it seems you've figured out more than I intended." John leaned forward, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this?" Dr. Carter's expression darkened. "Because humanity is on the brink of extinction. The catastrophic event you've been trying to prevent. It's already happened in my timeline. A combination of climate collapse, pandemics, nuclear war, and societal breakdown. Billions died. The world as we know it ended. I couldn't let that happen again. So you sent the letters," Priya said slowly, "to warn us." "Yes," Dr. Carter said. "But it's not enough to just warn you. You have to act. You have to change the course of history. That's why I brought you together. Each of you has a role to play in preventing the catastrophe." Harold frowned. "But why us? Why not someone with more power or influence?" "Because you're the ones who care," Dr. Carter said. "In my timeline, you were the ones who tried to make a difference, even when it seemed hopeless. You're the ones who can change things." John's mind was spinning. "But you said changing the future has consequences. What are we risking?" Dr. Carter's gaze softened, and for the first time, she looked almost sad. "Every choice has consequences, John. If you succeed, the future I come from will cease to exist. Millions of lives will be saved, but the world will be different, and some of you may not survive the changes." The room fell silent again as the weight of her words sank in. John felt a knot of fear tighten in his chest. He thought about the letter's warning, "Someone you love will die," and realized what it meant. If they succeeded, the future would be rewritten, and some of them might not make it. "What do we need to do?" David asked, breaking the silence. Dr. Carter smiled. "You've already started. Each of you has been investigating a piece of the puzzle. Now you need to bring it all together. Expose the truth about Virogen and EcoGlobal. Shut down the Cedar Ridge plant. Unite the fragments of quantum research to create a new way forward. And find the source, not just me, but the root cause of humanity's downfall." "And what's that?" John asked. "Greed," Dr. Carter said simply. "Corruption, short-sightedness, the belief that someone else will solve the problems we create. You need to change that. You need to inspire people to take action before it's too late." John felt a surge of determination. "All right, we'll do it. But how do we know we can trust you? How do we know this isn't some kind of trick?" Dr. Carter's smile faded. "You don't. But ask yourself this. Can you afford not to try?" The screen went dark, leaving the group in stunned silence. John looked around at the others, seeing the same mix of fear and resolve in their eyes. "Well," Marcus said finally, "I guess we've got our work cut out for us." Over the next few weeks, the group worked tirelessly to put Dr. Carter's plan into action. Elena and Harold focused on shutting down the Cedar Ridge plant, using Harold's engineering expertise to expose its safety violations and rally public support. Marcus and Priya launched an investigation into Virogen and EcoGlobal, uncovering evidence of corruption and unethical practices that they shared with journalists and activists. John and David worked on uniting the fragments of quantum research, collaborating with scientists to develop new technologies that could help address the world's most pressing challenges. It wasn't easy. They faced resistance at every turn, from powerful corporations, skeptical governments, and even their own doubts. But they kept going, driven by the knowledge that the future depended on them. As the pieces began to fall into place, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He started noticing strange things: a car that seemed to follow him, a shadowy figure outside his apartment, an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "You're running out of time." He shared his concerns with the group, but they were too focused on their missions to pay much attention. "We're making progress," Elena said during one of their calls. "We can't let paranoia distract us." John knew she was right, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense of danger. Then, one night, it all came to a head. He was working late, reviewing documents about quantum research, when he heard a noise outside his apartment. He froze, his heart pounding. The noise came again, a faint tapping, like someone trying to get his attention. He grabbed a baseball bat and crept to the door, peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty. He hesitated, then opened the door a crack. A man stood there, his face hidden in the shadows. Before John could react, the man shoved a piece of paper into his hands and disappeared down the hallway. John stared at the paper, his hands trembling. It was another letter, written in his handwriting. But this one was different. It was shorter, more urgent. "You're close, but you're missing the key. The source isn't just Dr. Carter. It's you. All of you. The only way to stop the catastrophe is to sacrifice yourselves. It's the only way." John's breath caught in his throat. He read the letter again, his mind racing. Sacrifice themselves? What did that mean? Before he could process it, his phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "We need to talk. Now. The ultimate sacrifice." John's hands shook as he read the final letter again. The words "sacrifice yourselves" burned into his mind. He didn't know what it meant, but the urgency in the message was undeniable. He grabbed his phone and called David. "Did you get a letter too?" John asked as soon as David picked up. "Yeah," David said, his voice tense. It's bad. We need to meet. Now." They agreed to meet at a quiet park near John's apartment. When John arrived, David was already there, pacing nervously. He handed John another letter, similar to the one John had received. "The only way to stop the catastrophe is to unite the fragments of time. You must become the bridge between past and future. Sacrifice yourselves to reset the timeline." John stared at the words, his mind racing. What does this mean? How do we become the bridge? David shook his head. "I don't know, but I think it has something to do with the quantum research we've been working on. Elena and Harold have been talking about a theoretical device that could manipulate time on a small scale. Maybe that's what this is about." John's stomach churned. "You think we're supposed to use this device? To do what exactly?" David hesitated. "I think we're supposed to use it to erase ourselves from the timeline, to reset everything." John felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. "You mean die?" David nodded grimly. "Yeah, if we remove ourselves from the timeline, it might create a ripple effect that prevents the catastrophe. But it would also mean we never existed. Everything we've done, everything we are, it would all be erased." John sat down on a nearby bench, his legs feeling like they might give out. "This is insane. How can we even consider this?" "I don't know," David said, sitting beside him. "But if the alternative is billions of people dying, what choice do we have?" John didn't have an answer. He thought about the letter's warning, "Someone you love will die," and realized it wasn't just about one person. It was about all of them. They were the ones who would have to die to save the future. The group met that night in a secure location, a small warehouse they had been using as a base of operations. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as John and David shared the final letters with the others. "This is crazy," Marcus said, pacing back and forth. "We can't just erase ourselves. There has to be another way." I don't think there is, Harold said quietly. He had been unusually subdued since reading the letter. If this is what it takes to stop the catastrophe, then maybe we have to do it. Elena shook her head. No, there has to be another option. We've come this far. We can't just give up. It's not giving up, David said. It's making the ultimate sacrifice. If we don't do this, billions of people will die. The world will end. We have a chance to stop that. How can we not take it? John looked around at the group, seeing the same conflict in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had worked so hard, come so far, but now they were being asked to give up everything. Not just their lives, but their very existence. We need to decide, John said finally. Together, but we need to be sure. Once we do this, there's no going back. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. One by one, they nodded. They were in this together, no matter what. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Elena and Harold worked tirelessly to complete the quantum device, a small, intricate machine that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus and Priya gathered evidence of their work, documenting everything they had done to expose the corruption and injustice that had brought the world to the brink of collapse. John and David coordinated the final steps, ensuring that their efforts would have the maximum impact. As the day of the reset approached, the group gathered one last time. They sat in a circle, the quantum device in the center, its soft glow casting eerie shadows on their faces. "This is it," John said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "Once we activate the device, it will create a temporal rift. We'll be pulled into it and that'll be it. Our timeline will be erased, and a new one will begin. A better one," Elena said softly. "One where the catastrophe never happens." "Yeah," Marcus said, though his voice wavered. "A better one." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Harold spoke up. "I just want to say, it's been an honor, all of you. I never thought I'd be part of something like this, something that mattered." "Me neither," Priya said, tears in her eyes. "But I'm glad I was. I'm glad we did this." John looked around at the group, feeling a surge of pride and sorrow. They had come so far, fought so hard, and now they were about to give up everything to save the future. "All right," he said, standing up. "Let's do this." One by one, they placed their hands on the device, feeling its energy pulse beneath their fingers. John took a deep breath and activated it. The room filled with a blinding light, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. John felt a strange sensation, like he was being pulled apart and put back together at the same time. He closed his eyes, letting the light consume him. And then, there was nothing. A new dawn. The world dissolved into a sea of light and sound, a chaotic swirl of colors and sensations that seemed to stretch on forever. John felt weightless, untethered from time and space, as if he were floating in an endless void. He couldn't tell if seconds or centuries were passing. All he knew was that he was no longer himself, or perhaps he was more himself than he had ever been. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. John opened his eyes. He was standing in a park. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and the sounds of laughter and birdsong filled the air. He looked around, disoriented. Everything seemed different. The trees were taller, the sky was bluer, and the people walking by looked healthier, happier. It was as if the world had been reborn. "John!" He turned and saw David standing a few feet away, looking just as confused as he felt. Behind David were Elena, Marcus, Harold, and Priya, all of them staring at their surroundings in awe. We did it," Elena whispered. "The timeline reset. This is the new future." John felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by a pang of sadness. They had succeeded, but at what cost? They had erased themselves from the timeline, sacrificed everything to create this new world. And yet, here they were. "Why? Wait," Marcus said, frowning. "If we reset the timeline, why are we still here? Shouldn't we have, ceased to exist?" "I don't know," Harold said, his voice trembling. Maybe we're not really here. Maybe we're just echoes, remnants of the old timeline. John shook his head. No, I don't think so. Look at us. We're solid. We're real. This is something else. As they stood there, trying to make sense of it all, a woman approached them. She was older, with silver hair and kind eyes, and she carried herself with an air of authority. John recognized her immediately. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled. "Hello, John. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you made it." "Made it?" David asked, his voice tinged with anger. "What do you mean, made it? You told us we had to sacrifice ourselves. You said we'd be erased." Dr. Carter's smile faded. "I know, and I'm sorry for the deception, but it was necessary. If you had known the truth, you might not have gone through with it." "What truth?" Elena demanded. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Carter sighed. "The truth is, you weren't just resetting the timeline. You were merging with it. The quantum device didn't erase you. It integrated you into the new timeline. You're still here because you're part of this world now. Part of its foundation." John stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "So, we're not dead? We didn't cease to exist?" "No," Dr. Carter said. "You're very much alive, but the world you knew is gone. This is a new world, one where the catastrophe never happened. And it's all thanks to you." The group fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. They had done it. They had saved the future. But at what cost? "What about the old timeline?" Priya asked quietly. "What happened to it?" "It's gone," Dr. Carter said. "But its lessons remain. The sacrifices you made, the choices you faced, they've shaped this new world. You've given humanity a second chance." John looked around at the park, at the people laughing and playing, at the world that seemed so full of life and hope. It was beautiful, but it was also bittersweet. They had saved the future, but they had lost the past. And they would never know what might have been. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Do we just live in this new world? Like nothing happened?" Dr. Carter nodded. "Yes, you'll live your lives just as you would have. But you'll carry the memory of what you've done. And that memory will guide you, inspire you to make this world better." John felt a lump in his throat. It was a lot to take in. But as he looked at the others, he saw the same determination in their eyes that had brought them this far. They had faced the impossible and come out the other side. And now they had a chance to start over. "All right," John said, taking a deep breath. "Let's make the most of it." The days that followed were strange and surreal. The group stayed together, helping each other adjust to the new timeline. They found that their memories of the old world were fading, replaced by new ones from this timeline. But the core of who they were, their values, their courage, their determination, remained the same. John returned to his job at the logistics company, but it felt different now. He approached his work with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that every decision he made could shape the future. David started a nonprofit focused on environmental sustainability, using the knowledge he had gained from their mission to make a difference. Elena and Harold continued their work in science and engineering, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Marcus and Priya became advocates for social justice, using their voices to fight for a better world. As the weeks turned into months, the group began to settle into their new lives. They met regularly, sharing stories and supporting each other. They knew they were lucky to have each other, to have a connection that transcended time and space. One evening, as they sat together in the park where they had first emerged into the new timeline, John looked around at the group and smiled. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." "Yeah," David said, grinning. "And we're still here. That's a bonus." Elena laughed. "A pretty big bonus, if you ask me." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the horizon. The world was still far from perfect, but it was better, and they had played a part in making it that way. As the stars began to appear in the sky, John felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had faced the impossible and come out the other side, and now they had a chance to build a future worth fighting for. Shadows of the Past. The new timeline was a gift, but it wasn't without its challenges. As the months passed, John and the others began to notice strange things. Subtle inconsistencies, fleeting memories that didn't quite fit, and a lingering sense that something was off. It was as if the old timeline was trying to reassert itself, like a shadow creeping at the edges of their new reality. One evening, as the group gathered at John's apartment for their weekly meeting, Elena brought up the topic that had been weighing on all their minds. "Have any of you been having weird dreams?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Like, memories from the old timeline?" The room fell silent. John exchanged a glance with David, who nodded slowly. "Yeah," David said. "I've been dreaming about the Cedar Ridge plant. It's like I can still see it, even though it doesn't exist in this timeline." "Same," Marcus said. "I keep dreaming about Virogen. It's like my brain won't let go of the old world." John leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been having them too. Dreams about the letters, about Dr. Carter, about everything we went through. But it's more than just dreams. Sometimes when I'm awake, I'll catch a glimpse of something, a face, a place, that feels like it's from the old timeline." Harold frowned. "Do you think it's possible that the old timeline isn't completely gone? That it's bleeding into this one?" "I don't know," John said. "But if it is, we need to figure out why. And we need to make sure it doesn't undo everything we've done." The group spent the rest of the evening discussing their experiences, trying to piece together what was happening. They agreed to keep a closer eye on their surroundings and to document any strange occurrences. But deep down, they all knew that this was more than just a coincidence. Something was wrong. A few days later, John received a phone call from Priya. Her voice was tense, urgent. "John, you need to come to my apartment. Now, I found something." John didn't ask questions. He grabbed his coat and rushed to Priya's place. When he arrived, the others were already there, gathered around Priya's laptop. "What's going on?" John asked, breathless. Priya turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a news article from a small, obscure website. The headline read, "Mysterious disappearances linked to defunct corporations." John's heart skipped a beat. "What is this?" "It's about Virogen and Eco Global," Priya said. "They don't exist in this timeline, but people are disappearing, people who were connected to them in the old timeline. And it's not just them. There are reports of strange activity at the site where the Cedar Ridge plant used to be." John felt a chill run down his spine. "This can't be a coincidence." "It's not," Elena said. "I've been doing some research, and I think I know what's happening. The old timeline isn't completely gone. It's overlapping with this one. And the people and places that were central to the catastrophe are trying to reassert themselves." "But how?" Marcus asked. "We reset the timeline. We erased all of that." "Not completely," Harold said. "The quantum device didn't destroy the old timeline. It just created a new one. The old timeline still exists in a way, and now it's trying to merge with this one." John's mind raced. "So what do we do? How do we stop it?" "We need to stabilize the timeline," Elena said. "We need to find a way to seal the rift between the old world and the new one. Otherwise, the two timelines could collapse into each other, and we'll lose everything." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. They had saved the future, but now they were facing a new threat, one that could undo everything they had worked for. Over the next few weeks, the group threw themselves into finding a solution. Elena and Harold worked on developing a new quantum device, one that could stabilize the timeline and prevent the old world from bleeding into the new one. Marcus and Priya investigated the disappearances, trying to find a pattern that could help them understand what was happening. John and David coordinated their efforts, ensuring that everyone stayed focused and on track. It wasn't easy. The closer they got to a solution, the more the old timeline seemed to fight back. Strange occurrences became more frequent. Objects disappearing and reappearing, people acting as if they were from the old world, and even glimpses of places that no longer existed. It was as if the old timeline was alive, trying to reclaim its place in reality. One night, as John was working late, he heard a knock at his door. He opened it to find Dr. Carter standing there, her expression grave. "John," she said, "we need to talk." John stepped aside, letting her in. "What's going on? I thought you were gone." "I was," Dr. Carter said, "but the old timeline is pulling me back. And if it succeeds, it will pull all of you back too." John felt a surge of fear. "What do you mean?" "The old timeline is fighting to survive," Dr. Carter said. "It's using the connections you still have to it, your memories, your experiences, to try and merge with this one. If it succeeds, it will overwrite this timeline, and everything you've done will be for nothing." John's heart pounded. "How do we stop it?" "You need to sever the connections," Dr. Carter said. "You need to let go of the old world completely. But it won't be easy. The old timeline will fight back, and it will use everything it can to keep you tied to it." John nodded, his mind racing. "We'll do whatever it takes." The group gathered one last time, the new quantum device in the center of the room. It was smaller than the first one, but no less powerful. Elena explained how it would work. "This device will create a temporal barrier, sealing off the old timeline and stabilizing this one. But to do that, we need to let go of our connections to the old world. We need to say goodbye." The room fell silent. John looked around at the group, seeing the same mix of fear and determination in their eyes. They had come so far, faced so much, and now they were being asked to let go of the past completely. "All right," John said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." One by one, they placed their hands on the device, focusing on their memories of the old world. John thought about the letters, about the sacrifices they had made, about the world they had left behind. He felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. They had done what they needed to do, and now it was time to move on. As the device activated, a wave of energy washed over them. John felt a strange sensation, like a weight being lifted from his shoulders. The memories of the old world began to fade, replaced by the certainty of the new one. And then it was over, a world reborn. The world felt different after the stabilization. The air was clearer, the colors brighter, and the sense of unease that had lingered in the background was gone. John and the others knew they had succeeded in sealing off the old timeline, but the cost was palpable. Their memories of the past were now faint, like fragments of a dream that faded upon waking. They could no longer recall the specifics of what they had done, only the knowledge that they had made a difference. John stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city. The skyline was different now, cleaner, more vibrant, with fewer towering skyscrapers and more green spaces. It was a world reborn, one where humanity had learned from its mistakes and chosen a different path. He felt a deep sense of pride, but also a quiet sadness. The past was gone, and with it a part of himself. The door behind him opened, and David stepped out onto the balcony. "Hey," he said, leaning on the railing beside John. "You okay?" John nodded. "Yeah, just thinking. It's strange, isn't it? We saved the world, but we can't even remember how." David chuckled. "I know what you mean. It's like we're living in someone else's life. But it's a good life, you know? Better than what we had before." "Yeah," John said, smiling faintly. "It is." They stood in silence for a while, watching the city come alive in the early morning light. It was a new day, a new beginning. But John couldn't shake the feeling that their journey wasn't over yet. The group continued to meet regularly, though their gatherings were different now. Without the urgency of their mission, they focused on building their lives in this new world. Elena and Harold had started a research institute dedicated to sustainable technology, using their knowledge to push the boundaries of innovation. Marcus and Priya had become influential voices in the media, advocating for social and environmental justice. David had taken a job with a global nonprofit, working to address inequality and poverty. And John had returned to his work in logistics, but with a renewed sense of purpose, using his skills to help build a more connected and equitable world. Despite their successes, they all felt a lingering sense of restlessness. They had been through something extraordinary, something that had changed them in ways they couldn't fully understand. and though they couldn't remember the details, they knew they had been part of something bigger than themselves. One evening, as they sat together in Elena's living room, Marcus brought up the topic they had all been avoiding. "Do you ever wonder if we're done?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I mean, we saved the world, right? But what if there's more we're supposed to do?" "I've been thinking the same thing," Priya said. "It's like we've been given a second chance. But what are we supposed to do with it?" John looked around at the group, seeing the same uncertainty in their eyes. "Maybe we're not done," he said. "Maybe this is just the beginning." The next few months were a time of exploration and discovery. The group began to delve deeper into the changes that had taken place in the new timeline, uncovering a world that was both familiar and strange. They found that many of the problems they had fought against in the old world, climate change, inequality, corruption, had been addressed but not eliminated. The world was better, but it wasn't perfect, and there was still work to be done. John found himself drawn to a new project, one that combined his skills in logistics with his desire to make a difference. He started working with a global network of organizations dedicated to improving access to resources and opportunities for underserved communities. It was challenging work, but it felt meaningful, and it gave him a sense of purpose. David, meanwhile, had become involved in a movement to promote global cooperation and unity. He traveled the world, meeting with leaders and activists, and working to build bridges between nations and cultures. It was a far cry from his old life, but he felt more alive than he ever had before. Elena and Harold continued their work at the Research Institute, pushing the boundaries of science and technology to create a more sustainable future. They had become leaders in their field, respected and admired for their contributions. Marcus and Priya used their platforms to shine a light on the issues that still needed to be addressed: poverty, injustice, and the lingering effects of the old world's mistakes. They became voices for change, inspiring others to take action and make a difference. As the group continued to grow and evolve, they found themselves drawn closer together. They had been through something extraordinary, and though they couldn't remember the details, they knew they had been changed by it. They were no longer just friends. They were a family, bound together by a shared purpose and a shared vision for the future. One evening, as they gathered for their weekly meeting, John stood up and raised his glass. "To us," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "to everything we've done and everything we're going to do. We've been given a second chance, and we're not going to waste it." The others raised their glasses, their eyes shining with pride and determination. They had saved the world, and now they were building a new one. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and they were going to make it count. As the night wore on, they talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams. They knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but they also knew they would face it together. They had been through the impossible, and they had come out stronger on the other side. And as they looked out at the world they had helped create, they knew that their journey was far from over. They had been given a second chance, and they were going to make the most of it.